Welcome to Tickets to Travel, the business of travel experiences. I'm your host, Mario Bauduin, and today we're not just talking about ticketing or travel. We're finally pulling back the curtain on a decade-long conversation that's been quietly shaping the future of how fans book and travel for live events. Joining me today is Eric Taraby, a longtime consultant, technologist, and ticketing expert who's been deep in the trenches of the secondary market, the global API supply chain for event tickets, and the ongoing struggle to merge live entertainment with travel booking flows. Eric and I go way back to the days when he cold called me during my time at JetSetter, pitching the idea of throwing event tickets into curated hotel packages. That call may have sounded simple, but it cracked open a bigger problem we've both spent the last 10 years chasing. Why hasn't the travel industry fully embraced live event tickets as a trip driver? From his early days at Ticket Evolution to his recent work expanding global ticket supply at Tickstock, Eric has been solving the back-end challenges that no one sees. From mapping mismatch inventory across marketplaces to helping global resellers confidently sell Super Bowl and Taylor Swift tickets in Tokyo, London, or even Bucharest. This episode is equal parts crash course and crystal ball. We dive into how ticketing tech works, the trust issues with OTAs, and how secondary ticketing has quietly become a powerhouse for driving travel demand, all while still being misunderstood by most of the travel industry. Whether you're an OTA exec, a hotelier near a stadium, or just a fan who books flights around your favorite bands, stick around. Eric's here to decode the entire ecosystem and help us imagine what travel would look like if we finally understood how ticketing works. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials at Tix2, the number 2, Travel Pod. And of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcast because Tickets to Travel starts now. Welcome to Tickets to Travel, the business of travel experiences. I'm your host, Mario Bauduin, and today we have Eric Taraby. Eric, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Mario. Happy to be here.
So we've been talking about merging tickets and travel for the latter part of about 10 years, if I remember correctly. Do you remember the first time you decided to give me a shout? Do you remember what was on your mind when we first connected?
Yes.
I think it was like maybe 2013, 2014.
Around 2014. Yeah. In anticipation of this podcast, framed it mentally as like, this is just going to be a continued conversation of the one we started back when I was at Ticket Evolution and you were at JetSetter. Reached out to you and was like, you guys are curating these special, unique packages. Throw some event tickets in there, right? This is a trend we recognized a long time ago. And I remember it wasn't you I was dealing directly, but someone tagged you in and you were like, yeah, we need to figure this out. And here we are 10, 11 years later, and nobody's really quite figured it out yet.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's our problem to solve, Eric. I think I remember briefly getting, it was actually a phone call too. Remember that? You cold called me and that was rare. Even back then it was a little rare, but now it never happens, right? Like people typically are texting each other or they're on a phone or they're emailing. And I remember picking up and you were saying, why don't you have event tickets in there? Not really understanding sort of the way that online travel agencies work. And so I started to sit back and I'm like, yeah, I really don't see an issue. It's just a matter of putting up a tab. And then later on during that process, it was all this sort of coordination that had to be done in terms of pulling in an API or having a white label that would then sync with your checkout process. And it became more of a challenge to sell it internally when an OTA in particular is really used to selling hotels, selling flights. And then later on, during that time at TripAdvisor, actually, it turned into selling activity tickets. So I really don't think live events, sports, entertainment, concerts has really had its moment with online travel just yet. Would you agree? Or you've been in this 10-year trail as well of trying to figure out how to inject live event tickets into the travel process.
I agree. It's still not been solved, or the opportunity hasn't been really tackled by at least the major travel resellers and OTAs.
Looking to upgrade your ticketing game? TickStock is your all-access pass to smarter, faster ticket distribution. Say goodbye to clunky systems and hello to real-time inventory, streamlined operations, and global reach. All in one sleek platform. Whether you're a reseller, rights holder, or event pro, TickStock connects you to the world. TickStock.com, where tickets move smarter. Looking for the hottest events, concerts, and experiences around the world? Look no further. Hello Tickets has you covered. From must-see concerts and sports games to unforgettable tours and Broadway shows, Hello Tickets gets you fast, secure, and hassle-free access to the best events worldwide. Skip the lines, book with confidence, and make every moment count. Visit HelloTickets.com today and say hello to your next adventure.
It's funny, I'm thinking back to that conversation and subsequent conversations that we've trying to tease out potential solutions. And that reminds me of the kind of education you gave me on how OTAs operate, how they think, in terms of hotels being by far the biggest margins that they have, and the need to absolutely optimize conversions. And even if a load time on page is microsecond slower, it convert all this stuff. So event tickets will always be, or activities or everything will be outside of hotels will be afterthought to the OTA process. Even back then, since back then, the industry has evolved some, like you just mentioned, Trip. Now Viator is the major driver of their revenues towards an activities platform, even though we all know and everybody in the industry knows that Trip by themselves was never really a traditional OTA in that sense. And then subsequently, the online rise of tours and activities OTAs like Get Your Guide and Klook and et cetera, et cetera. And then they're focused on more the experiences. There's been some movement in the travel industry as a whole, but that movement hasn't really addressed nut that needs to be cracked, that is events.
I think you're right in the sense that you bring up the activities and experiences and arrival coming into play in the chain of events when you're booking travel. Usually it was about the destination first, right? So I'm going to Paris. So I'm going to buy my flight. I'm going to get my hotel. Maybe I get a rental car and I'm going to take a tour. So that in the chain made a whole lot of sense. What's changed over, I would say, over the last few years, and we can thank, again, Taylor Swift and the Super Bowl and F1 and all these big events, is that now people travel because of the event. It's that thing that says, I really don't care where it is, but I have to go see it. And that's the main driver. I have to buy the ticket first and then build the trip around that. Now, the problem for those traditional OTAs, as you mentioned, the first one is that it's legacy. They're legacy tech. So they're used to doing it in these silos of air, hotel, rental car, that type of thing. So to introduce something at the beginning of the process is somewhat difficult, right? Because these are big systems that have been around for a while. And so it's a multi-level business development endeavor to talk to a BD person, a product person, a tech person, and then getting it scheduled. There's a lot of things on, I think, the ticketing side where the APIs are still maturing as well when it comes down to seating maps and ease of use and things of that nature. I think that's the first piece. The second piece is that because activities have been the rage, I'd say over the last, 5 to 7 years or so, it's pretty low margin for the OTAs. Yeah, everyone did it, but it's not really killing it. It's not a huge percentage of hotels or anything else. So do they really want to spend the time?
I'm curious, like what kind of margins from an OTA perspective on your traditional tours and experience, throw inbound integration on a theater ticket, which I guess is the most analogous thing to events. Well, what is the margins there?
Theater tickets are a little bit different because it just depends on how they're distributing it. A more traditional sense is like a walking tour or a, let's say, Statue of Liberty ticket, right? Something for a major tourist attraction. It's typically in the 20% range. Basically, they'll discount it 20% and you mark it up and then it shows in parity with what it would be at statueofliberty.com, for example. That's usually it.
How does that compare to a hotel? General averages, I know everything's negotiable from.
It's similar in the way that it slides. So independent hotels, you'll have above 25% in margin sometimes, all the way down to a corporate Marriott, for example, which is probably in the 12% range. And so the difference is just frequency. People don't necessarily have to go to the Statue of Liberty, but they definitely need a hotel room.
And hotels $200-$300 a night compared to $50. So
and don't get me wrong, those tickets will get up to it. In the case of helicopter tours, if you're going to the Grand Canyon from Las Vegas, that could be $200-$300 per person. Family of four, $1,200. And then, but that's a one-time shot. It's not like they're doing that every single day. So they don't see it as the same type of baseline business that a hotel. That's why they're specifically just OTAs that sell just hotels. They don't even want to deal with flights, because flights, no matter if you're going from here to Dubai or here to LA, it's still $5 a booking. It doesn't really matter. It's a flat cost. So they want the frequency and the evergreen inventory, because that's the other thing. That's a question for you, actually, is the difference being is that these are all event-based. Their dates are set. And that's another complexity for an OTA to market around, because there's so many of these events that it's easier just to say New York Marriott Marquis, put that sign up for the entire decade, versus Taylor Swift in Madison Square Garden this one night, right? Or these 2 nights.
Sure. It doesn't scale. You'd have to be a lot more nimble and flexible, and it doesn't scale in that sense. That makes complete sense.
That's why I always thought sports was the easier thing for OTAs to consume, because it's a season. And so I would think, like, even back in your experience, possibly at the MLB or other entities that you worked around, just being in ticketing for so long, how was the marketing structured? Obviously, you have opening day and then you have different tent poles throughout, but you almost had time off, versus in the hotel world, it's always on. How did you guys approach marketing that way?
From an MLB side, I really wasn't on the marketing strategy side, but it's pretty much common sense. You're right. In terms of when the season is, and obviously local teams have their own kind of local marketing objectives around, typically now is before Christmas. And then there's also bump up before the season starts. For instance, in March, you'll see on the taxi cabs here in New York City all around, Yankees.com, Mets.com, whatever baseball stuff. And then as a whole, the league would market around tentpole events. So that's it. As a hotel or as a OTA, you need to be always on.
It's really tough for them to just see as these single off events when they're building product and buying marketing. I think what it comes down to, and this is what we talk about a lot, is it's one of two things, right? Like, it's demand, which we're talking about in terms of marketing it, but then it becomes supply. So the supply part on live events is a little bit different than hotels. So on the supply side, an OTA needs to be able, they can't just take a one-off. I'm just going to do the Yankees. They have a global audience. They're spending millions of dollars on driving traffic. They want to make sure that whoever lands on that site, whatever they want to do, wherever they want to go, there's a ticket available. And so this is a good transition to talk about what you do on the API side for some of the ticketing partners that you've worked with in the past.
At Ticket Evolution, what we built out was essentially solving the supply side for anybody who wanted to sell that ticketing inventory. We aggregated a bunch of inventory for bigger resellers, created solutions via API for them to be able to seamlessly sell that out to their customers and handle the end-to-end. Well, I should say 90%. Of course, whatever that brand is would interface with the customer and we do everything in the background. And they're really making me go back to those first conversations that I would have dumbingly knowing nothing about travel, the true thing. This is no brainer. And calling someone like you, Mario, up, being like, why don't you guys do this? In a lot of ways at the time, say 10, 12 years ago, that's a solution I was selling for a problem that never existed. We solved the supply problem. So you can have a reliable source of supply. It's year round. It's all these major events. At the time, I think the biggest objective outside of putting it on the homepage was really the stigma against the secondary market, ticketing market. Expedia, for instance, boom, like I don't know who I'm dealing with. It's not the New York Yankees. It's some intermediary who, in my imagination, could be Rowdy Rick around the corner from Yankee Stadium on 161st Street, that kind of. Fast forward 10 years, that part, the cultural stigma, at least, has attenuated, especially here in the US with the rise of all these secondary marketplaces led by StubHub, Vivid Seats, SeatGeek, et cetera, et cetera. From a travel reseller perspective, the supply problem or
challenge,
suspicions or what have you, challenge around it. Yeah, I can imagine that was one of the blowups.
And these are the conversation I get into now, is that it's still the trust issue. It's how do I make sure I can transfer that ticket as a large OTA to the right person? And I think what gets, as a piece of education, maybe you can enlighten how these ticketing systems work in terms of getting that supply into any type of ticketing API, and what would make an OTA confident that if I'm Joe Schmo who wants to go to the Yankee game and it was bought off my travel site, that using one of these wholesale or secondary APIs is the right solution.
I think your typical consumer, and even your typical OTA or the audience here would, on this travel side, would be surprised about the sophistication of technology into a very existing secondary ticketing market. This is not just some random broker like sending you the tickets. And it's multiple third-party software services that kind of help facilitate the flow of data across multiple marketplaces, distribution channels. And that also, which eliminates a double sale. Technology automatically pulls it off to any other marketplace. And that's old technology at this point. But just even the facilitation of the inventory and the fulfillment of the inventory itself is a pretty complex solution that secondary ticketing industry has spent a lot of money on figuring out. So, and then I should note, the rise of mobile ticketing eliminates a lot of the manual errors that would come into play with secondary ticketing fulfillment back way when, and they would be manual errors, your PDF, and you have those 4-pack, and it seats 1, 2, 3, 4, and say 2 are sold on Marketplace A and 2 are sold on Marketplace B. You got somebody fat swinger and seats 1 and 2 to Marketplace A, again, 1 and 2 to Marketplace B. There was never fraud, Craigslist and all those places, but online, there was never like fraud in the secondary ticketing industry. Those problems were always like manual. And with the rise of mobile tickets, make them very easy. Just transfer from an email address, somebody accepts it, shows up on their phone unless they want to transfer it back to someone else. Yeah, the primary ticketing system, a big barcode is issued. It eliminates all that. Fulfillment, it shouldn't be a problem. Now, when it comes to certain events,
while you're putting that thought together, I think it's important to name that technology. It's ticketing automation is what you're speaking of, that allows the mirroring, right? Of same event, it's Yankee Stadium on this particular date. There's all these different marketplaces, but essentially once a ticket is purchased in the primary ticketing system, it is pulled out of the inventory. So it then marked, and it have to be an approved secondary market to be able to have the primary ticketing system, which 90% is one company, and then they will push that out, right?
Yeah. You don't have to be an official marketplace. You don't have to have a license. MLB has rolled out their ATM authorized ticketing marketplace, but that only enables, the part of that enables the marketplace to deliver the ticket within their own kind of wrapper and their own brand.
Join the movement at Humanitix.com. Every time you buy a ticket, someone profits. At Humanitix, we believe that profits should have purpose. Our booking fees fund education, healthcare, and critical programs for those who need it most, not corporate bonuses. We're a nonprofit ticketing platform turning live events into global impact. So if you're hosting an event or just buying tickets, choose tickets for good, not greed. Join the movement at Humanitix.com. Tired of overpriced tickets and sketchy promoters? Discotech is your personal nightlife concierge. Discover guest lists, discounted tickets, and VIP tables in cities around the world. Whether you're booking EDC in Vegas or a yacht party in Croatia, Discotech gets you in. with over 1.9 million downloads and real-time push alerts for the best deals. Save money, party smarter. Download Discotheque on iOS or Android today.
But even then, like if I'm a consumer, or even if fan-to-fan transfer, I've got the ticket sent to my email address. I have Ticketmaster select the tickets or SeatGeek app, and I transfer them to your email address. And at that point of transfer, it hits Ticketmaster system, reissues a barcode or QR code or whatever they use these days. And then you have the tickets and the unique barcode that works. Now, once you transfer it again, your barcode gets canceled out. So what I'm saying is there have to be an official license with a primary or rights pool. And it's still automated.
So it's automated. It's an actual ticket. It's being transferred to the right people who have basically been verified, whether it's the seller or the buyer at that point. All of this is very interesting because if you talk to someone on the travel side, maybe the best parallel is a hotel room. So they're pulling inventory out of a property management system, PMS. It'll be pushed through whatever channels that are connecting, usually through a CRS if it's a corporate hotel company, and then, of course, on an actual OTA. So it's similar.
And with the PMS, but you're also able to price it differently per channel, per marketplace, based upon negotiated agreements, or just I like them and I don't like them, or trying to understanding geographic yield. So if OTA is in whatever geography and knowing that you can get more, very similar dynamic at play.
I feel like that's important to note because it takes a little bit of the fear out of it. And they've perfected a hotel sales through various OTAs to distribute. Then it's the same thing. It's just a new learning curve on the ticketing side, and with just different players with different names in a lot of ways. One of the things that I think is very challenging when we start to have this conversation is just supply in general, especially in Europe. When it comes down to soccer, to basketball, all these different sports that are played in the UK and in mainland Europe, because I had an episode earlier here in the season with Tomas from Hello Tickets. He was describing the challenges between how these tickets are transferred or the seat licenses are made because they're truly members of a club. I don't think as Americans we understand that as it's a football club, meaning you actually, like a country club, you're part of the membership. And so those licenses are few and far between. And the loyalty factor of those fans is big. So for them to actually put it out on a secondary market is really hard to do. So do you have any insight as to how maybe that type of European supply is aggregated?
Yes, I do. As you're aware, Mario, try to replicate and mature the secondary ticketing model that was created in the US, and I did at TiVo, and trying to do it on a global scale with a company called TixStop. And you're right. The biggest challenge in Europe is to start with securing the inventory. It's also kind of cultural seller status, but yeah, securing the inventory, also figuring out the fulfillment piece of it. And Tomas is right. There's challenge when it comes to European football in certain parts of the stadium that are season card. You need to actually show a season card to get into the gate alongside with your ticket. Those are more specific, and they're not as large on the pitch or 50-yard line, let's say, for an American audience at Bernabeu Stadium for a Real Madrid game. Yeah, the only way to do that is through a season card. Yeah, the fulfillment aspect is a little bit more challenging. It's obviously not as automated. Season cards are on a barcode on your phone. And more so for the challenge in Europe versus what we know here in the US is the primary platform marketplace is a lot more fragmented. Here in the US, you have obviously Ticketmaster, the major dominant player. And then you have maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 other smaller players. Access, obviously, Pro Venue, which is 22 to 30 Major League Baseball clubs, and a couple other smaller. We tend to look at Europe and think it's pretty homogeneous, but it's 36 different countries in Western Europe itself. And They have different regional players and different specialties and different languages. But you just got to understand. So figuring out how to automate with all these different ticketing systems is a little bit more of a complex. And that's what we've been trying to build out at TixStop.
That's promising in a lot of ways because you're right. Whatever people think or say, Ticketmaster is the dominant primary ticketing system. And I say this a lot because we have friends over there too. It's a primary ticketing system, but it's also a marketplace. And I think that gets clouded in the regular fan experience stuff.
Yeah.
But to your point, there are other primaries out there, whether it's ProView, ProVenue, Access, Paciolan, Audience. There are different ones, but I never knew that in Europe, is that number right? Like 60 to 70? Like,
that's what I believe I was told, but I had the same reaction you did. I couldn't believe it. I was like, really? She's not used to that.
Yeah, I mean,
that didn't make sense.
From a language perspective, I could see why that would make sense, but man, that's a lot of API integration work.
And like consolidation's coming soon for the same trends that you're having this podcast, because the internationalization of events. And now from Taylor Swift, I can have certain demands to standardize things across different. I don't have to pick and choose. If I want to go to Bucharest and I want to go to Sydney, Australia, then obviously there's going to be more consolidation as due to the globalization of that.
And that's the trend, right? In our superfan conversations, I can't get to Miami because it's $5,000 per seat if I want a decent seat, but I can go to Bucharest, fly there and get a decent seat and be completely happy and also make it a travel experience because I'll take in the sights and have the food and do all these different things. And so as you may see a little bit of that data from a TikTok's perspective, do you guys track how many US people are coming over and buying that? Do you have any sense of what those numbers might look like?
That's a great question. And like TiVo, it's a B2B platform, so and visibility of the end user data. That's our marketplace partners and other distribution partners who interface. Good percentage, you would think. And as you touched upon the kind of travel aspect of even just European events, in Europe, it's just a lot easier to travel. So if I'm in the UK, if I'm in London and Beyonce is ludicrously expensive, maybe it's 500 quid cheaper to see her in Paris. We're going to spend this money, might as well make it a vacation.
Yeah,
stay in a nice hotel. Let's segue into another piece of technology. Spotify helps artists identify where they've got demand and feed these algorithms can we do a sustainable pour there? And then that goes into, which I don't know if you want to get into right now, Mario, in terms of the globalization of events, right? Like a little bit of an arms rush now, geography to geography, in terms of investing in the requisite infrastructure to be able to support Taylor Swift's next tour or Beyonce Cowboys next tour.
You mean from a venue perspective?
Colossal opportunity for travelers.
Are you speaking?
Not only from venue perspective, obviously starts with the venue perspective. Right. Currently, there's over $3 trillion worth of investments going on across the world in stadiums and arenas being built the next 10 years. Obviously, Saudi Arabia, they're hosting the World Cup, but they've got some Emirates venues, Milan, Costa Rica, Nairobi, Hong Kong, over $3 trillion. And it's not only, it starts with the stadiums, but you need the surrounding parts of the stadium to be able to host foreign visitors coming in. And that obviously starts with the event, the venue, hotel infrastructure, and the rest of the economy that kind of supports tourists, places to eat, et cetera, et cetera. It's great in these countries because they're able to attract new people. It's Singapore having Taylor Swift for the only 3 nights in the South Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. It almost caused a foreign crisis with Singapore apparently negotiating with Taylor Swift people to have some exclusivity around that. Now they've got all these people flying into Singapore saying, wow, what an amazing time I had at Taylor Swift concert. I can't wait to go back to Singapore to see another concert. And now you have all these city geographies wanting to bolster their tourism programs, investing in this requisite infrastructure.
It's a topic that comes up here a lot from a destination perspective, and hopefully I can get some destination people on the podcast to talk more about it, because there is a movement in these, whether it's a CVB, a DMO, destination management organization, that is, one, you may not have tickets to the actual show, but you can still come to said destination and experience the team, the sport, the artist through workshops or seeing everything themed a certain way. And then it becomes like almost piggyback riding on the popularity of a particular artist that drives more tourism into the future. Because then what I'm finding too is that if the fans do react a certain way, and maybe you have some insights here, but the promoters, the artists themselves are like, you know what, I think we need to book that destination again because there was such a great vibe there, right? There was so many fans who were engaged. We packed the house. There's great feedback online about it. There's many people looking at our socials and all this stuff.
Posting YouTube videos of the concert and whatever the social commentary around that is. And of course, there was Let's Go Back.
Yeah, I feel like that's the other piece. Like you mentioned Saudi Arabia and Dubai. I think those are the next Las Vegases globally. And again, that infrastructure piece, it all comes back to where this conversation started. It's the supply piece. You have to be able to have the technical integrations into these various arenas to provide the supply, and then an aggregated API of some type, if I'm a major distributor, to make sure that I have something to sell. And so really companies like TikStocks, Victory Live, TiVo, and so there's also a consolidation on that end from what I'm gathering, right? Because you essentially have Victory Live now and you have Ticket Network. And then is there any other kind of wholesale? I mean, there's a few like Elevate does direct rights to people, but they're very bespoke in how they push their inventory out. And I know everyone's selling each other's stuff from a broker perspective, but are there any other sources that people should look at and say, hey, listen, I can hit this API and get all the supply I need?
So to clarify, I'm a travel seller. What other sources are out there from an aggregate supply and having the right technology in terms of the distribution solution, travel seller to be able to also travel, also tickets back. I mean, there are a number of different companies. We could get like into the event ticketing weaves and TiVo or Victory Live's recent acquisition of Logitech, also where there's consolidation there. There's just a limited number of players out there, truth be told. Our boy Keith at TFL Solutions, they also provide a similar kind of service. Ticket Network is probably the other big one right now. And then there's TikStock. And the differentiation that we have is we're more global in nature, whereas the other companies are 95% concentrated to US and Canadian inventory.
Yeah, no, that definitely is a differentiator for TikStocks. I think it's similar to hotels though. Each one of the major OTAs will go out and directly contract, and there's other wholesalers who directly contract. So pick any hotel. They probably have anywhere from 3, 4, 5, up to 10 different wholesalers who they negotiate rates for. And then they each have an API for distribution where and what they do is they aggregate all of them. It's a little bit different with hotels because it's not by seat and by view. It's a room type. And depending on the demand, the bar rate will fluctuate, and then there are discounts off of those bar rates. And so the point I'm getting at here, Eric, is that everyone sells each other's stuff. Whoever has the most supply makes a distributor's life a lot easier because you're probably getting better pricing, depending, because they now have technology that sort of bubbles up the best price based on the query. So if I'm looking at one website and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to Fort Lauderdale for these set of dates, depending on who has the best rates at that time, that'll come up because then they're going to back channel a bit and say, oh, I'm going to get more margin on selling this particular inventory. And then that's what they show to that particular fan or guest who's looking for it. So I feel like ticketing is similar in that way to a certain degree, although I don't really know the pricing element.
Very similar, because if it is the same inventory rate, just flowing through different types, and that'll create the same wholesale price, but in the correlance of the ticketing that the broker list, the resale list cost, he doesn't care. He just wants that list price. But now then the intermediaries, the solution providers, the aggregated exchanges, like a TikStock, yeah, they would then have to compete on what their intermediary take is in order to be that result that shows up first on whatever OTA paid. The similar concept work. I don't think we're there yet. So yeah, you're right. it is not as happening as involved, I guess, in the hotel industry and the OTA industry, but it is slowly happening from marketplace perspective. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to, you've been doing this for a little while on the ticketing side. You've talked to lots of travel people on B2B as well.
Sure.
There's just no education around it. And so what happens is, what I think, here's another difference, I think, with ticketing, live events people, and travel. The travel industry is between a $9 and $11 trillion a year industry versus ticketing is a little bit smaller, maybe a lot smaller. And so when you start to look at this, a lot smaller. So I was just being respectful, but because of the type of content that they provide, whether it's a Ohani ticket or
piece of demand on the hotel side. Absolutely.
It does. But
I think that's where you're getting at.
No, that one, but two, there's this comparison of whether or not it's worth it for the travel industry to even sell it. And then you have these different entities within ticketing and entertainment where they hold on to that information and they want to make sure everyone goes directly to them. So there's little factions of that happening. And so there's a lack of education. So people don't really understand. They keep secrets as to, hey, I have the rights for this, so I have the best price versus this one and that one. And I think that education piece doesn't exist to the wider travel industry to understand what's going to be best for when I sell that to the guest. So if I'm a travel agent and I'm plugging into a ticketing backend to sell a Yankees ticket, how do I know that's a good ticket for that fan I'm already booking their travel, their airfare, their hotel, this and that. And there are different types of fans / guests who they're price conscious, or some of them just are like, I want to sit as close as possible.
Or they like to just create noise. But stellar in that, not having pure visibility into the supply, that supply being a little murky in terms of where it's come from, pricing differences across different other channels. I get why I would be a little hesitant to sell a rent ticket. You want to make sure that you're selling the most competitively priced ticket that a consumer could otherwise get elsewhere at home. That just doesn't exist.
Well, it's hard to,
given the dynamic nature, especially hotels are dynamic in nature in terms of pricing, but in the vet ticket, it's just the way it is.
Also, there's no real comparisons on the ticketing side, meaning you have Kayak for hotel and flights. You have TripAdvisor comparing rates, and those hotel companies or those OTAs are buying ad spots for that. Kind of tough to do on ticketing.
On the metasearch site. There are a couple of metasearch sites in ticketing. In fact, SeatGeek was originally a metasearch site.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Funny story, like SeatGeek, great at technologists at heart, being able to pull data. They made affiliate deals with all the major marketplaces. But then it's just like metasearch sites and OTAs. But SeatGeek, they realized, all right, I'm going to, here's my marketing spend, and I'm driving people to my search site, my metasearch site, and then I'm pushing it out to a marketplace where in that marketplace is capturing, say, 30%, 35% margin, whereas SeatGeek was getting whatever 5-10% affiliate spend. SeatGeek was like, wait a minute. They ran the numbers eventually, and they're like, why don't we create our own marketplace? More money in that. Currently, in Europe, there are a couple of meta search sites that are trying to become more global in nature. And again, they can only have true visibility of the market if they have true visibility, if they have true integrations with all the different secondary ticketing marketplaces that exist out there. Even within the event ticketing meta search side, there isn't pure 100% visibility into all the inventory going to us.
I would imagine it'd be really tough going seat to seat. I know people who do that, but if it's an on sale for a Beyonce, Taylor Swift, you don't have time to do that. In sports, you might be able to, because doing a seat to seat comparison on 4 or 5 different sites, that'd be really tough to aggregate.
Yeah, but you could do it via section or even down to your right. Somebody was so finicky that I want to sit section 1, 2, 4, but I need to sit in row M or better. Somebody's that finicky. I think you can do it. data exists out there to do. But yeah, I get what you're saying. If not like hotels, room type, that's 300 sections in a stadium.
And then there's so many different seating maps, different plans in an arena.
I think the biggest issue for the secondary and really come up with the solution for the travel industry, because if you are going to, and this is the way I would recommend, is to integrate multiple feeds from multiple different sources, ensure there's some competition among the different feeds, also to ensure you're getting full geographical reach, multiple integrations. Now, the kind of fundamental sin in the secondary ticketing industry in the US especially, there's no standard protocol from what we call mapping basis, meaning there's no standard normalization of data that flows across different markets. Vivid Seats could call an event. They could say the Chicago Cubs versus the Los Angeles Dodgers, whatever their event ID and the nomenclature StubHub is going to do. The Chicago Cubs at the Los Angeles Dodgers and have whatever event ID. And then there's so many different third-party software and automation tools that exist too. They all have their own unique identifiers, and they might call sections in a stadium very differently. And it's a big kind of mess that obviously the industry individually has thrown a lot of resources at fixing and the fuzzy logic and normalization of data, but there still is some leakage that exists. And what I was knee deep in the US industry personally was like, somebody got to fix this. I did do some kind of temperature checking with different marketplaces or the third-party software provider. And it's one of those things where nobody wants to unilaterally disarm it. It will only work if everybody. I guess when you tell me like Octo and towards an activity space, I forget who the holdouts were, but don't you understand this is better for the industry as a whole? Lift all our boats, grow the whole industry, but you still have some companies that are like, we think we have a competitive advantage here. Yeah. That's one of the things, but that is one of the things that is holding ticketing industry back. And if I was sitting in Booking.com shoes or Get Your Guide shoes or whatever, it'd be like, I wanted to tackle this the right way and get multiple integration. That's a problem that now I have to solve. And that requires more resources. We're getting really technical here, Mario. I think we're boring the audience.
No,
I know
you'd be
this
surprised.
is good educational tools, but
no, just to end that piece, because you're right. It's interesting that there isn't a standard. And when Octo came about, for people who don't know what Octo is, it's this uniform language for tours, attractions, ticketing.
Exactly.
So I remember I actually presented that option to a client once on the live event side, and their mind was blown. They're like, you guys do this on the travel side? I'm like, yeah. But I think that just serves that travel is more like hospitality based, right? So they're trying to help each other out as an industry versus, like I was saying earlier, live events is a little bit ego driven. People want to,
it's very stupid. It's stupid. It's an easily addressable solution in the whole scheme of things.
That would help all fans.
If everybody comes together to help all fans, it'll help secondary, right? And also, okay, so now you're eliminating all the 0.001% issues that may come up, which gives the secondary the bad name. So if you solve for that, then you're without a doubt outgrowing the industry, because then you eliminate that little dark cloud in the consumer's mind, or in the case of travel resellers. So why don't we fix it? And not only that, each unique exchange, automation piece of software, marketplace, they're all investing their own dollars and resources and infrastructure and mapping it themselves internally to their. And I've said this before, maybe not in a podcast. It makes too much goddamn sense that nobody's going to do.
It's so simple.
That's my rant.
No, I get it. But that's what I was trying to get out of this, is that that makes it tough for businesses that want to distribute these tickets. I think it's at the core of the CTF in a lot of ways, that there's one big company that is setting the parameters around transferring the tickets, whereas it could be a lot easier to help fans get access to the right ticket at the right price and so on and so forth, if there wasn't all this static from a technical perspective. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand, is that...
You're right. Agreed. Yes.
So what gets you up in the morning in terms of live event ticketing and travel? What's the next wave that you wish things would change?
I don't know about change. Looking at the event ticketing industry and the rise of global events for the last 3 years, really been very exciting. I'm learning a tremendous amount about different markets, but just in the same time, just seeing real time, like the globalization of events. I spent the early part of my career, almost 60 years in Major League Baseball, America's pastime. So you do have some perspective from a rights holder in a league, and just to see the kind of globalization events all over, specifically starting with the 4 major U.S. sports leagues, MLB just coming off the Tokyo series with the Tigers over there, and then Cubs and Dodgers kicking it off. Just from event ticketing perspective, did you see, like, flew in from Chicago and they're paying like $3,000 for a ticket on top of what they paid for airfare and hotel. But that trend's all over. MLB was South Korea last year. I know they're playing Mexico games this year. The NBA, they had the Celtics Nuggets in Abu Dhabi. They had the Brooklyn Nets take over Paris last year. And then the NFL say next year, they plan on playing 8 international games. It's Sao Paulo this year. Next year, Bernabeu Stadium, Madrid, the Dolphins are playing. See, I'm not a Dolphins fan. I'm a Madrid fan, but I pay money to go see that kind of experience. It's all over. And not only just sports, the U.S. importing sports into Europe and beyond, it's also the rise of European football. When we were kids, Mario, you and I, we woke up before our parents did, and we snuck in, turned on TV to watch cartoons. Now our kids are waking up early and they're watching Arsenal versus Chelsea. They're growing up to become Premier League fans. They're supporters of, they're going to buy their kits. They're going to subscribe to whatever local streaming services in their market televise those games. They're going to have on their bucket list experiences to one day go over and visit White Hart Lane. I just heard about your past guest with his Liverpool experience. Sports entities themselves, like Liverpool. So even the nature of sports leagues and sports teams, not only sports players, but the sport personnel, everything is becoming globalized. It's great to watch. It's great to see and experience.
This is all pretty new, man, right? Like this was not a thing 10 years ago. This was not a thing pre-COVID. But I think there's been this focus on moments. That's why you could put a premium on that ticket. I understand that it wasn't a thing before. And I think it's companies like all the ones that we've been talking about today that provide access to the supply, which then drives the travel for it. And hopefully it's conversations like these, it's like tip the hat of certain leaders on both sides to think about whether or not they should merge these at scale and create products for fans/guests, which I always say it's ironic because a ticket seller or rights holder is selling to a fan their tickets. But when you add them into a travel process, they become a guest. And ironically, they're not the same person, right? Because you have to serve them differently. Typically, when they have the ticket, they're waiting for that one experience. But if they get that hotel room, they got to have a great check-in. They got to have a nice room, have a good mattress to sleep on. And even if the breakfast is horrible on the third night or the third morning, you're going to hear about it on TripAdvisor or wherever else they're going to put a review. So there has to be this merging of fan/guests, I guess, processes or protocols, even from a marketing perspective, or definitely from an operational perspective to help grow that base of fan/guests.
Let me ask you, from the perspective of the OTA and or hotel property itself, how aware are they cognizant of, and I don't know if there's any impact on the data that they see a big event happening in a certain geography? Do they see certain spikes before it happened? Do they have a team that are actually like, wait a minute, like what's going on that is dedicated on what's going on in the world to help with their kind of yield pricing, or is it just all algorithm based? Do they know that, obviously you know about the Super Bowl, are they aware of like the seasonality?
I think from a local perspective, they may be. Take New York City, that's easy. They will download the event calendar. They may know somebody who's there who'll give them the indication like, hey, you know what? On sale for Billy Joel is coming on this date. And so typically what they'll do is they'll just keep their rates really high or stop sell it altogether. And then once the marketing sort of comes out, then they start to talk about, okay, we're going to open up these dates, but the rates are going to be super high. So usually with hotels, they have revenue management systems that give them the indication of historical data that comes in, and then they tell them how to price it. But old school wise, there's no way for them to understand the demand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the data isn't out there to plug into, and there's no standardized source of data yet to plug into what exactly when Taylor Swift comes to town in month X, when Y and Z are also in town, how is that going to impact?
It's more of a question of the destination. Chicago said that when Taylor came to Chicago, she broke all the occupancy records because over those particular dates, that 3-night period or whatever it was, they were at 98% for the market. So they can tell, but it's all historical data. It's not they can count on it, because I think it happens in micro markets, right? Where a Cubs game in the same market, it works for when they play the Dodgers, but not so much when they play someone else. Having that data is there. I think another thing is just the entire market could sell out. It's a citywide, but then it becomes more of an exercise for the hotels competitively against each other to say, these people are going to pay a premium because I'm better during that Taylor Swift concert versus this other place. And then it becomes this race to who can get the highest average daily rate or ADR. And that's the strategy. So I've touched on this before where tickets are a lot different in terms of how they collect the data, how they price a ticket, so on and so forth, versus hotels don't really care. They're just managing the demand that comes into the market and then funneling it and trying to capture as many of those people as possible. And then you give them a good stay, and then they come back when they want to come back and they become loyal. So it's a different way to look at it.
For the right tour and or team travel experience, would it make sense? Like, I'm Taylor Swift. Do my people reach out to Marriott and say, let's do a deal for my next tour, and we're going to give you whatever licensing rights, and you guys come up with the Taylor Swift fan package? It doesn't necessarily have to include event ticket.
No, but
it just has some kind of more authentic feel, closer to the artist and that. And then Taylor Swift obviously gets a big check from Marriott. Marriott gets to associate the brand with Taylor Swift, and their fans get a great experience when they check into a Marriott.
There's nothing stopping Taylor or any artist from doing those type of deals. And then there's another angle where, the manager, promoter, whoever it is, if they get a piece of that, let's say sponsorship deal from Marriott, then they can release premium seats.
And look, I talked about this 2 years ago or 3 years ago with you during the pandemic, semi-annual lunches and breakfasts. And I remember saying, we should get together, working for the ticketing industry, trying to push a solution to a problem that really not clearly defined. Work for a ticketing company and help them how to get event tickets into it.
Yeah, you're doing it too, right? There's a handful of people who understand both sides and have to customize a pitch. It's definitely a thing. That's what I say to everybody. It's definitely a thing, but getting a large travel seller to take the risk, to integrate this, to create the packages, because that's the thing. That's the other thing I've learned throughout the last few years too, is if it's not automated to scale, like through APIs, if you're doing just individual packages, it's just a lot of work. You got to go contract the hotel. Yeah. You got to take care of it. Yeah. You take companies like On Location, like what they do is really great, but man, they got to throw a lot of people at it. It's very expensive to run. And that's why the packages are $15,000 per person.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So maybe it is something that starts on a grassroots level.
Eric, thanks for your time on Tickets to Travel. We hope you come back.
Attention travel and ticketing innovators. Whether you're a startup disrupting the industry or an established company ready to take your distribution strategy to the next level, Expo Travel is your ultimate partner in online travel and ticketing distribution. We specialize in helping businesses of all sizes optimize their operations, expand their reach, and unlock new revenue streams. And for startups looking to grow, we partnered with top venture capital syndicates to help you secure the funding you need to turn bold ideas into thriving businesses. From refining businesses to scaling operations and raising capital, Expo Travel is here to drive your success. Visit Expo Travel today. That's xpotravel.com for a consultation. And let's transform the way the world travels, one innovation at a time. Expo Travel, because the future of travel and ticketing starts with you.